us today and those who have gone before us. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are listening.
Thank you. I get a motion to adopt organization agenda.
Elaine, Joe?
And second.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So moving right into the agenda, we have oath of office and swearing in of.
Do you want to vote on the agenda?
Sorry, backing up. These, can I get all in favor of adopting the agenda? Unanimous. Thank you.
Yes. No, they're not swearing.
I'll wait.
So we're gonna move right on to that.
Okay.
So 4.1, oath of office and swearing in of new members. So because John is with us remotely, I'm going to swear in both John and Ken at the same time. However, we will formally re-swear in John at the next meeting. We legally can swear in via video conference this new day and age.
There's
but
new legislation that allows us to do
will-
oaths by video
we will
conference.
formalize that when we see John in person. So moving into that next, so that we can get John and Ken some swearing rights and active in the discussions. I'm going to move into that process and maybe just introductions for anybody that doesn't know John or Ken. Ken Kulak is sitting between Elaine and Cam. Welcome, Ken, and maybe once we swear you in, I'd just ask you to invoke yourself to that process for everyone's interest. And John Soderberg, John has his camera turned off because he's under the weather, but if he's not shy, feel free to turn it on, John. And
Well, you say it's off?
yeah,
Oh, sorry about that. Here, let me see what I can do.
that's okay.
I'm kind of a little bit,
Travis was.
yeah, well, and I haven't done much computer stuff for about 10 years, so I'm kind of, let me see. Oh, hang on a sec. There. Did that work?
There, it's coming up.
Hey, there I am.
There you are. Excellent. So let's move right into the swearing process. And both Ken and John, you okay with swearing in, or would you prefer to affirm? Ken's a swear.
John, are you comfortable swearing to God, or would you rather affirm?
Oh, no, I'm good to swear to God. Yeah.
Great. Okay. I'll move over to Ken.
Get up.
John, you may not feel it, but you're right over my right shoulder, so we're in close.
I'm missing that.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I'm hearing you better, yeah.
Okay,
And John can just raise his right hand.
perfect. All right, so just repeat after me. I
Hi. John Soderberg,
Ken Kulak, swear that I will diligently,
swear that I will diligently,
faithfully,
faithfully,
and to the best of my ability,
and to the best of my ability,
execute according to law,
execute according to law,
the office of a member of the Lacombe Police Commission,
the office of the member, as a member of the Lacombe Police Commission,
and will not
I will not
accept and discharge my duties,
discharge my duty,
disclose to any person, any matter,
disclose to any person, any matter,
or evidence brought before me as a member of the Lacombe Police Commission.
as a member of the Lacombe Police Commission.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Here we go, John.
We'll just do some something. And I'll just get it. You sure?
Yes.
Yeah, we have your security clearances and we'll follow these documents. I did, so
Come on.
it was mine first.
It was good. PR anymore.
We'll hold on to that
Yep.
next meeting.
Sounds good.
All right, Ken, would you please introduce yourself to the board? We've all, earlier in the process, the mayor, when he makes the appointments, we do get to see a chance to see your resume, so we have a little bit of a hint. And last meeting, we all had a chance to get to know each other, but we do have some members who weren't here last meeting, so.
Okay. Ken Kulak, I'm from a small town northeast of Edmonton called Two Hills. Spent 30 years with the RCMP, or just under 30 years. 2014 to take over the forensic unit and worked out of Red Deer till I retired in 2019 and made Lacombe my home since 2014, and it's the best city in Canada.
Woo-hoo.
There we go.
And that's why I put my name in to help the city. Thinks it's a small city with a big future.
Did coin that one.
Yeah. Pick me.
John, would you mind doing the same?
My name is John Soderberg, and I'm one of the victims of the Farmers Bonds bill. I did contract COVID, hoping to be straightened out shortly. I was born and raised just west of Red Deer. I worked for Wolf Creek Public Schools for just over 29 years. Retired in 2015.
My first boss.
Cam's first boss. All right, then. There we go.
Look at that, small town.
Thank
One
you.
of my bosses too, hey, John?
Yeah, that's right.
Who was the boss of what there?
Yeah,
Yeah, we had a good working arrangement.
Sonia said do it and John did it.
What's that?
Sonia said do it and John did it.
you don't know John well enough if you think that's the way it ran. Glad to have you both. Welcome to both of our new people.
Thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Thanks and welcome. Moving right into the business, this being the first Lacombe Police Commission meeting of 2022, we have to do our annual elections. So I'm going to move into the call for nominations for the position of chair. Once that position is filled, then I'll hand over the reins of the meeting to the new chair, and we will complete the rest of the elections. But at this point in time, can I call for any nominations for the position of chair? Chair Will Blush.
Chair, nominate Corey Gish as chair.
I accept that nomination. Thank you.
Thank you. We need a seconder.
On a nomination, I don't know that we do.
Okay.
But call for more.
Okay,
I vote, or I move that nominations, please.
I think I have to do 3 calls.
Okay.
So I'll make a second call for nominations for the position of chair.
Good job, guys. Come on.
Sounds.
I
That's
already
what
showed,
we
I
have.
showed my hands.
The third and final call for the position of position chair. I'll ask for a motion to cease nominations and Councillor Buxra, and that would be seconded by
Cam Pensky.
Mr. Kenstone. All in favor?
Unanimous. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your, is it confidence or bus throwing? I'm not sure. I do appreciate it. And as I've expressed before, I really enjoy this committee and I really enjoy the people on it. And I think we do excellent work. So we will carry on.
We appreciate you.
Yeah.
We sure do.
Thank you. So the next thing we need to do is we do need to appoint a vice chair. This is a position that Judy Luke has carried for many years. The position of vice chair is to then step in to run the meetings if the chair is not available. And the position of vice chair officially is in charge of ensuring member training. Traditionally, the vice chair moves into chair, which isn't something that has to happen, and it didn't necessarily happen last time. But I would, I forgot to kind of do a quick round ahead of time just to canvass interest. Does anyone have any suggestions, or does anyone have any interest?
I would suggest for nominate someone based.
So Sonia's in her last year of the term, like just to, not that Sonia won't accept this, I know Sonia fairly well, so I have a feeling she's in her last year of the commission. So I wouldn't mind seeing this be somebody who, just for consideration for the board, who would be then carrying forward to, so we have someone in place to replace me. I think I have 2 years left.
I agree with that statement that you just made, Corey. That's exactly what I was going to say. I certainly don't mind doing the role, but also exactly that. I am in my last year, I think.
We'll take as many as we get. So I don't think it's inappropriate for me to, I would like to nominate Cam Henstone if he would be interested. And the reason for that in my mind is simply he has had at least a year under the board and he's got a long tenure. I also think Elaine would do a great job of that and would like to see if there's any interest. And I apologize for not doing this.
Just going back to Sonia.
Yes.
After that.
Oh, sorry. Sonia, will you formally either accept or decline the nomination?
I am going to decline the nomination. Thank you, though, for the nomination, but I'll decline it this time.
Just an off-the-record discussion. Would either of you be willing to do it? It's not a huge time commitment at this stage, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to step into the chair position.
I can't for this upcoming year.
Okay. Would you be willing, Cam?
I will accept the nomination.
So we have one nomination for Cam. Do I have any further nominations? And a third call for nominations? The motion to close, Cora's move that we close nominations. Seconder? Ken? All in favor? Away we go. Thank you, Cam. Sorry for the ambush, but not really.
All good. Add that to the rest.
All right, so moving on, we have an agenda in front of us. On review, do we have any concerns, deletions, additions? We do have Brenda Vaughn online. Thanks for sitting through all of our work. Elaine?
I'll move that we accept the agenda as presented.
Thank you, a seconder. Cora? Jen, are you able to follow us? Let me know if you're not. All in favor of the agenda? Away we go. We have minutes in our package from December 16th.
I'll move to accept the minutes.
Seconder on accepting the minutes. Any discussion or further thoughts? All in favor? Away we go. All right, well, thank you everyone to date. Welcome to Brenda Vaughn. Brenda is first on our agenda for doing presentations. For Ken and John, a little bit of background. We have asked Brenda Vaughn to provide consultation support on developing our strategic plan. We've done this with the support of the city as well, who's quite interested in the process. And so the Police Service is going to be one of the first within the city to proceed with it. So Brenda, without more, I'll ask you to take the floor and keep going. We have all heard from Brenda once this fall, and she does have a draft that she'll speak to us about. Thanks, Brenda.
She is vegan.
You've got
Brenda,
your mute on, Brenda.
How's that?
Excellent.
Oh, great. So good morning, Chair Gish, and thank you to the Commission for inviting me to do this presentation. As Chair Gish indicated, this is work that started a bit of time ago. The City of Lacombe was looking at developing key performance indicators for the city, the entire city portfolio, which I worked on with all the managers and of course worked with Chief Bloomhagen during that process. And that project wound up earlier this year, and then the Commission and Chief Bloomhagen and I continued to work together to do a little bit more focused work relative to the Police Commission. And so the document that I believe you have in front of you is a draft sample key performance indicator strategic plan. And it's a document that I worked on with Chief Bloomhagen. And the goal, I think, for today is to present the information and do a brief overview of the project. And then the Commission will proceed as it desires in terms of discussion or questions. So just a little bit on key performance indicators and key performance frameworks. This is an organizational process that is adopted that what it does is it clearly aligns the business strategies or the frontline activities of an organization with all the strategic goals that may exist throughout the layers of an organization. So for the case of the Police Commission, that is creating a straight line through and a linkage between City Council strategic goals and plans relative to policing service levels for the community, City of Lacombe, all the way down through the Commission's strategic goals, which would align with the city's strategic goals. And then for Chief Bloomhagen, from the technical point of view, his practices and strategies and activities would then actually speak to those layers that are going up through the community, through the organization. And so the purpose of a key performance framework is to do some streamlining, it's to do some connecting, but it's also meant to sort of simplify and really focus in on data and indicators and information that truly tells you what your performance is doing relative to the goals that were established throughout the organization. So within a framework, you will have strategic plans. And for this document, what we worked with were all the strategic and regulatory documents that have an effect and direct the work of Lacombe Police Services. And we look through those strategic plans to see what the articulated goals are for the future state of your organization. And so those can be regulatory things, those can be things that are involved in a police act, those can be things that are actually strategic goals of a commission, and then they also can link themselves to some policy statements. And so when we look at strategic plans, we're really looking to see what the future state or the desired future state is for the organization. And then from the strategic plan, you would have some strategic goals. And we always state goals as though the condition that you are seeking is in fact in place. And so you'll notice that KPI language is a little bit different than other strategic plan language, because it doesn't really talk about getting somewhere. It talks about what the desired future state is. And fewer goals are considered optimal. It's the goals that, keeping those simple and streamlined and clear, allow you then to start looking at your activities and strategies and direct those up towards that goal. Multiple goals can become contradictory, and they become difficult to track. And they sometimes just spread your resources a little too thin, and you can lose a bit of focus. So what we did for this strategic plan, pardon me, is we came up with one strategic goal based on all the prior documentation and discussion that we could lay our hands on. And so the one primary goal for the Lacombe Police Commission is policing excellence. And you will see when we move through the document then how we're building the framework backwards from that particular goal. So then the other thing we need to have is some key performance indicators. And indicators are simply the piece of data or the information that, if you collect it, would tell some sort of a story relative to that strategic goal that you had established for your organization. And robust indicators have two dimensions to them. They measure your efficiency, and they also measure your effectiveness. So they talk about how much you do, and then they talk about the difference about what you did, how well it was done, and the impact that it would have generated. And then strategic measures are the particular organizational activity or strategy that actually provides an understanding, or it's the mechanism that makes you understand that if we do these things, we believe in all reasonableness that it will move us towards that strategic goal. And so you're trying to really pare down your language so that you have some very clear statements of what you're doing and why you're doing it and where you hope it's going to take your organization. And a KPI framework is actually an organizational process. It's not a snapshot in time. It's not a hit or miss. It's not a, this didn't work, we'll throw it out. It's an actual process. And basically, it's creating a system that makes it apparently easy to do the right thing, that when you look at your data, and if you are tracking towards your strategic goals or away from your strategic goals, you would understand what it is you needed to do to correct that path and start heading the direction that you were wanting to head. Or in the case where you are on track, you're simply plotting along a timeline how well you are moving towards that specific goal. So that's kind of the beginning parts of a performance framework. Now, there's all these pieces are important, but the things we're going to talk about or interest you, I think, the most are going to be your performance targets. So performance targets establish your expected service level relative to each strategic measure. And you will see when we go through the document that there will be several performance targets that will relate to a number of goals or other strategic measures. And so you can see what we're doing is we're starting with these high goals, the visionary goals for your organization, and we're working down through the framework and becoming more and more specific as we go. Performance targets generally are things that would be established in things like policies, or some organizations actually have service level documents, although KPIs certainly can stand in for service level documents. But at a very high level, what I can tell you, one of the performance targets that you have right now is that you are a 24/7 day a week community policing model. So that right there suggests a certain level of service that you're going to provide. And as you move down through your organization and your KPI framework, we're going to be getting more and more specific about what that means when we define it and how we know we're tracking towards or against that, that specific goal. So you'll see in these documents that we have created 49 performance targets, and they're related to 6 strategic goals. And you'll see that these groupings may have shifted around a bit from how you may have been thinking about them before, or how they had been presented before. And that was certainly a discussion between Chief Loomhagen and myself. But again, going back to this idea is we're trying to really simplify, align, and be specific. Certainly anything within this document that you are wanting to discuss or flesh out or change or edit is certainly going to happen in future discussions, but this is sort of a starting point. Then one of the important things for a performance framework is your analysis and your reporting. If you're going to collect the data, you need to understand why you're collecting it. You need to understand what it's telling you. And then you have to analyze it to understand which way it would suggest that you should be moving or changing or thinking or celebrating. And then you are going to want to decide how you can report that information out. And reporting has 2 or 3 things you're going to want to think about, and that is how often you report. You will not report on every goal or every indicator at the same time. We will develop specific reporting cadences for different reports, and you already have that well enmeshed in your current practice. You are doing things where you are doing monthly reports and annual reports, and you have rolling 5-year averages that you follow and those kinds of things. But we will flesh that out a bit more once the commission approves and confirms which indicators will be reported on. Now, I did talk at the beginning about having this through line, and there's just one point of discussion that I've made reference to in this project report. In looking at all of the City of Lacombe Council documents, there is not a clearly defined strategic goal relative to community policing. And while that doesn't have a negative impact on key performance frameworks for the LPS, I think it would be a worthwhile discussion to work with the city as they are doing strategic planning to work with them to develop a very specific goal around community policing. That will just create that final linear link between your funding and oversight body and your frontline activities. And of course, that would be a role for the commission to consider. So with that, I can take you through the document. Or did you want to pause for questions at this point? I'll carry on.
Everyone's had this draft to review for quite a bit. So I think, Brenda, I'm sure there will be some things, and Corey, sorry, I apologize, I didn't have my head out so yet. So I think we'd be really appreciative if you'd go through it with us.
Okay.
Then we can just make some notes on our thoughts and then.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And so the section we're moving into now is the actual draft strategic plan that we're presenting for the commission's consideration. And as I say, the information in this is an amalgamation of all of the documentation that I reviewed on behalf of your organization. And so we looked from policies to strategic plans to audits, any formalized document that you have that you are reporting data in, and then of course things like acts and regulations and those kinds of things, which I have to say, there are a lot of things for the Lacombe Police Commission to be integrating into an evaluation framework. So as I mentioned, we have one strategic goal, and that is policing excellence. And this is where you'll start to notice some of the language where I said KPIs are established as though the condition already exists. And so policing excellence is where you will say, we are City of Lacombe Police, and we do policing excellence. And within that, the first measure we related to that was that you are well governed. And so this related to, there was a lot of information in your prior strategic plan around governance. And so we did our best efforts to combine the commission's goals and desires with any of the regulatory and policy oversight documents as well. And the other thing you'll notice in here is we do provide a little bit of a definition or background on each of the measures, and that is just so people understand why we're collecting this and the things that are in that impact that particular measure. And this also talks a little bit about the world that the policing community or policing services work within. And so the idea that, you know, you have an overall goal of serving community prevailing best interests and public accountability, but you're also trying to do that in a pretty tightly woven regulatory environment. And so we want to talk a little bit in here about the performance targets. So these 10 things on the following page are the 10 pieces of data that we think we could set and measure, and they would indicate whether or not your organization is well governed. Now, some of these things existed in your prior strategic plan, and if you notice anything that has a highlighted defined targets, those are statements that already exist in some of your documentation, but they don't have specific targets. And so they would be easy things for you to go back to and establish specific targets around, which would totally complete the KPI, the performance indicator for this particular measure. And so the things we talked about here is that your audit requirements are met. And an example of this is, I noted on one of your audits, you had done very well. And Chief Bloomhagen, I can't remember the number, but the one issue they had, I think it was 85% or something that you had met the audit requirements for. It was the report that indicated you should maybe do a little bit more about, I think it was reporting out or data collection or something. But anyways, if you had had a target that said you would meet audit requirements 100%, which is what I think most people are going to say, but you might have a range there, because the purpose of audits are not to say that things are not functioning, not always that they're not functioning well, but again, that there's room for improvement. So the commission might consider saying on audits, we want to be at least 90%. We want 100%, but we would live with 90 to 100%, understanding that you're not always going to hit every audit at 100%. That when you do get an audit report, that the recommendations for improvement are incorporated. And here I would ask you to set a target of a timeline. So depending on the different auditing bodies that you have, you might say for this particular audit, we would want to adopt and implement those recommendations within 1 year or 6 months. It has to be relative to the actual work that needs to be done. That you have 100% of the commission positions filled, that you have a range of diversity of commission members. This ties back to being reflective of the community that you're serving and having voices at the table on the commission that can aptly reflect those community sectors. And so you might define targets here that you might just follow the city's demographics in terms of age groups or ethnicities or gender, or you could choose anything, but you might set a target that would make you say, yes, we feel that we have a diverse commission membership. And then reviewing your 5-year average of public complaints, you might set a target there as well. You know, you probably don't want any complaints, but you may be able to set a target there that there's a decreasing trend, that you would have a maximum that you would not want to see, or there's just a little bit more clarity in language you could have in there. And then when you report these out, you're reporting a trend. So let's say on the complaints, you would report out in the last 5 years, public complaints increased or decreased by this percentage. And that is the amount of reporting that would come out relative to that one measure. And of course, we say that the policies would align with provincial standards at 100%. You're not really looking to be working against your regulatory bodies. The percentage of complaints are reduced or sustained would be another thing, another measure that we could speak about. And that could, I understand you have sort of formal complaints and less formal complaints. And so we talked a little bit about, you may want to have, be able to talk about that. And then maintain your citizen satisfaction level of 82%. You have a citizen survey that you have used a few times, and I think you could set a target there and report out on the citizen satisfaction. And then your victim services survey, you would set a target with that, which is also an evaluation or a measurement tool that you've been using. So on measure number 2, which is managed budgets, we talk a little bit in here about that inextricable link between the money you have and your policing service level, because they drive each other. And so alignment of your service levels and budgets are what actually create your ability to deliver your service. And the amount of your budget determines your force strength, which actually then is impacted quite tightly with regulatory requirements. So the whole notion of what the profile of the call is that suddenly dictates how many officers have to attend versus community policing. So we tried to define in here all of the things that impact service level, which is actually funded by your budget, because we were trying to find a way to connect those two things without separating them, because they cannot be separated. So if there's going to be a certain service level of policing, that drives a certain level of budget, which then creates the capacity for you to be on the street in whatever form you need to be out on the street. The previous strategic plan talked about overtime and doing some work internally administratively to reduce the reliance on overtime budgets. And so there's 2 pieces of the budget we thought were worth mentioning, which is the operating budget, within that the overtime budget. And then of course you've got capital budgets. We talked a little bit in here about you have already got some benchmarking you could do. So in your strategic plan, you had some information about trying to maintain your budgeting costs when comparing yourself to like communities and like policing services within a certain margin. And that's a very good target. That's a very good indicator to follow. And it totally, I think, would reflect and illustrate what's happening on the street in terms of the work that the police are actually doing or within the community. So we tried to do a little bit of a description here about the connection between budget and service level. So some of the targets that we set were just what I mentioned, the per capita policing costs equal or to or below the mid-range Alberta Municipal Police Servicing cost average. And so then you've got a number of $237 per capita, which is you can be comparing your budgetary expenses to that as an ongoing measurement. And then there can be a trend involved in that. And this is something that you probably wouldn't react to on a short-term basis. This is something you would probably react to over a 3 to 5 year term because it's hard to turn around on a dime. Budget variation year over year would equal a target rate. That was in your strategic plan, and we feel that that would be an excellent indicator. And we could set a range that would include your HR, your CPI, or the CPI and the community growth. We think it's important to try to develop a bit of an indicator or a target that's reflective to the increasing or changing demands on the police service. This requires more research on my behalf and certainly with Lauren's input. But we see this as and this is something that you collect a lot of data on already, and I think would be easy to build out. And then the other indicator you had about how well your budget's managed is that overtime costs would be equal to or less. I am suggesting that you create, again, a range there, that they would become equal or less than a percentage of your overall budget. And I think you would simply look at past trends and look at what that number looked like over the past, say, 10 years or 5 years or whatever parameter you thought was reasonable. And then you could create a indicator there. And then the fourth one was reliance on overtime budgets are reduced, which we talked about earlier. That's been something that's been in your strategic plan for some time, and it's referenced in a number of reports as well.
So Brenda, that's one of those ones where if it's been accomplished, you leave it there.
Yeah, framework, if something is accomplished, it's a good thing to track that, because if you start to not accomplish it, that's one issue. But it's also maybe something you're doing that you don't need to be doing, or it's in fact just an understood indicator within that particular industry.
Okay. Thanks, sorry for interrupting.
No, it's fine. Pardon me, I've got a tickle in my throat. Uh-oh. Yeah, don't we all rush to that right away? So measure 3 was robust force strength. And here we were talking about that connection between your force strength and how to ensure your responsiveness and that the approved service levels occur. And so this too talks about what your current authorized strength is, the hours of service that you're expected to provide. And we've added in the idea about there's a depth of force strength that presumes basic police services. And so this goes to that point of when you're having like regular patrols of the city or low risk interactions with the public. Pardon me, more water. The number of force strength you need is less than if the calls you're attending are ones that demand that you have higher force strength and attendance for those particular calls. And then all the associative protocols that come along with specific calls. And so we've tried to define the difference between basic policing and then the more intense policing that can happen. And of course, you can't know that ahead of time. And so this is what explains sometimes those changes in how quickly or how soon or how on top of things you can be when you're working in an environment when you don't actually know what's going to happen in the next few hours. So this also highlights the reality that the service levels approved by City Council through the budget and through the statement that there'll be 24-hour policing, 7-day-a-week policing, and that it's a community-based model. And that, I mean, the goal is everybody wants for the police to be everywhere they need to be as soon as they can be. But your sworn officer numbers directly impacts the ability to meet this particular, to create your service level. So there is no service level if you don't have enough police to be doing the policing that you said you were going to be trying to do. So you can see how these things all are, we're hoping this is showing that how they're all quite interlinked, and so many things have to be considered. So performance targets that we set around here were, you have a human resources plan, and that plan, the goal of that plan was to prepare the police service to have adequate troop strength moving into the future and to meet the circumstances of the city as you know it. And so that is one thing that if that plan becomes approved, that could become one of your trackers, that you are adhering to it or you're not adhering to it. And then you have a look at those hits and misses within that and see what has to change in order to meet the recommendations of that approved plan. And then sustaining your staffing levels of whatever your approved levels are. So in this case, 23 sworn officers. Of course, that means you can cover shifts more effectively. You're relying on overtime less. You have adequate numbers of officers available. Sustained staffing of specialized assignments. There was a lot in the strategic plan, the commission strategic plan, around maintaining officers that are fully trained in specialized tasks or techniques. And so we try to incorporate that, and that does have an impact on your ability to police. So an indicator would be that your sworn member vacancy rate is at 0%. Again, we understand that those things change all the time, but you would create a bit of a range there as well, understanding that you have people off for various reasons. You have people off for illness or family leave or work-related injuries, you know, getting tied up in very complex cases, all those kinds of things. And so we would set a range with that is reasonable, and I think based on your trends in the past. And then that your authorized hours of services are filled. So I think you would report out on, you're to provide 8,760 hours a year. You would report out on how many hours that you were not fully staffed. This goes back to how many people are supposed to be working at a time. Per capita sworn member ratio mirrors provincial averages. So we've set ranges there. Dispatch call types are met by adequate numbers of qualified police officers. This goes back to the idea that particular file protocols require particular technical attacks or responses. And so you would want to be able to report on your ability to do that. Response times are maintained or exceeded. That's an easy thing. You report on that quite often, and I think you could do some trending on that. And these are your 2020 numbers, but I would encourage us to go back and create a 5-year, again, rubric or something, and then talk about how your averages are. Support positions are filled and maintained. So this goes back to the making sure that your dispatch is filled and that your administrative core is filled, because all of those things impact your ability to do policing. Recruitment, selection, and training guidelines. You could create a training rubric. This goes back to that list of, that comprehensive list of specific training and skills that you want officers to have. And Chief Bloomhagen was indicating we could create a rubric for that, and then we could report out on, of the 23 sworn officers, how many of them are trained to the fullest capacity. Then force diversity meets national averages where applicable. So we could create a baseline around force diversity. This is an interesting thing to track, and it's not something you could track on a 1-year term, but you may set goals like within 10 years. We would hope that our force had this kind of diversity. And that would take some further research to, again, look at the community, look at policing industry in general. But certainly that's something that could be tracked over a much longer period of time. Then you've got your administration, things like file process clearance rates and clearance rates by crime. Sergeants have completed the senior police administrative course. And then reduced time that positions are vacant. You could set some targets around here. I know that there's very tight protocols around recruiting police officers, and then just the supply of police officers, and then do they want to come and work in Lacombe? Lauren and I spoke about that a lot. But I think that it doesn't hurt to sort of set some goals around those kinds of things and look at some innovations or creative means in order to keep that within your established target. Your recruitment meets or exceeds the 18-month recruitment period. With that's a very clear target that's laid out for you in the Police Act. And you're balanced to force strength. This is the idea of, we talked about this quite a bit. One of your strategic goals is to have long-standing tenured officers and all the benefits that brings. But also you need to maintain a force where you've got some new people coming in, and you've got some middle-term people, and you've got some widely experienced people. And so looking at how, when you're doing recruitment plans, how you can create some kind of a balance to your police force. And this is again another long-term indicator that you would track, possibly over 5 years or 10 years. Officer diversion was a measure that we came up with. And speaking with Chief Bloomhagen, he was talking about the time that officers can spend being involved in non-criminal calls or non-criminal matters. And of course, the impact that has on policing is, and the community is, A, the need is there in the community. If an officer attends and there is not another organization more suited to that issue to assist, officers aren't going to leave people in particular plights. And so the amount of time that an officer is spent working on non-criminal files obviously is taking away from the time that they are doing regular policing, if I can use that word. And so we were interested to say, well, is there some way that we could actually start to look at that and quantify that and understand what those things are? And the goal of this would be that once we understand what those things are, so we did talk about things such as mental health, transporting people to shelters, those kinds of things. But that information, if we could build a little data set on that, then that allows both the commission and city council to start lobbying to bring additional services or resources to the community if we find out that we're having particular issues around, mental health or housing or whatever it is, but that are clearly not criminal. And so we spent quite a bit of time talking about this, and this is the measure that we came up with. We would have to go in now and look and see about how we could collect the data. But when I looked at, I don't think I've said this already, you guys collect a lot of data. And so you are one of the city's portfolios that are not going to have trouble moving to this kind of a model because you have a lot of data. And I think all we need to do is streamline it into a KPI framework data collection tool. So I think that the ability to collect the data on what is taking police officers away from their regularly assumed duties would be information that we'd be able to get, and then it could be useful in sort of a longer term strategy. Measure 5, crime is managed. So this again is pointing to the fact that, ideally we'd love it if there was no crime and there were not issues that we needed to deal with or unsavory behaviors. But the fact is we do, and we don't know what they are always. And a lot of different factors come into play that cause these things. And so I think Chief Bloomhagen's goal here was to be able to really clearly illustrate that the one final measure is not no crime, but again, it's trends within the crimes that you're experiencing and the extent to which these things flourish or get out of hand before policing or police resources are able to interact with some of the issues. And so we talked about here, this is, you'll be familiar obviously with the change in crime severity index, the crime severity index. That would be a very useful, that is a very useful piece of information for a very broad statement, I think, and you would work in 10 to 15 year trends on this. I noted in your strategic plan, I think it was, you had a 5-year rolling average or something. And so I think that's a very useful thing to keep up with. But understanding that that is not the one thing that indicates the success or the misses within the policing service. We would look at maintaining or exceeding a favorable standing of mid-range within that the CSI for similar sized communities, and that would be on the 5-year average, which is already in your strategic plan. We would track calls for service and shifting patterns of crime typology, and so looking at what's happening and maybe go back a few years and try and extrapolate a few years out based on trends that you're seeing within your community. Again, it sounds like the data is there. I don't think it's being collected or analyzed in a a particular way, but I think we would be able to get the data. And speaking with Chief Blumhagen, we would look at the percentage of calls requiring more than one officer and the trend of that, and then comparators using industry indexes. So we would create comparators for Alberta, Western Canada, and municipal police forces. We would try to harvest data relative to those specific pods of information and then compare LPS to that. And then, of course, we would look at response times. The sixth measure we came up with was community integration. Here we talked about the fact that this is a community-based policing model, which by definition says that you are out integrated in the community and you actually use that as a mechanism to understand what's happening within the community, good and bad. And trying to just have a level of engagement with citizens in the community that benefits, you know, the intel of the police service. And so also, this is based on your community policing based model, which is kind of central to this. And so we were hoping to build some targets or data that we could collect that would actually talk about how well the LPS is integrated within the community. And you certainly do a lot of extra community work in terms of committees and have members sitting in with different groups and working alongside like volunteer groups. But I'm also thinking about things like the community policing models and MAD and those kinds of things. And so the things we'd look at here were calls for service, and we would do some trending around that. And we would also look at that diversity on the workforce. And so with this, again, the diversity on your workforce should give you greater integration into your community. Your citizen survey responses, this is where you have a question, you have a couple of questions on your citizen survey, which we would just add a couple of more relative to this particular measure, and set some targets. And then the citizen participation connection, we would create a rubric here. When I got looking at all the different groups and time and hours spent, the officers spend with different groups, I think it would be well worth it to create a bit of a rubric there and trend that out over a few years. Of course, you would want to see that there's a variety of community groups that you're interacting with, and you would want to see that sustained. You wouldn't want to see that diminishing. And that just goes back to, I think, your how deeply involved you are with the community. And then community partnerships, we would also create a rubric for that, because you have a few different levels of community partnering going on. Some are more formal than others, but I think they all add up to creating a sense of how integrated the police officers are with or the services with the community. So that is what we came up with in terms of a draft strategic plan based on key performance indicators and based on all your existing documents to date. I'd be happy to take questions.
Ken, please proceed.
Looking at this on your measure one, you have 3 of 10 dealing with public. I don't think that brings to the issue of getting client satisfaction or citizen satisfaction. 2 of those can be moved to other parts.
Yeah, I think for right now, I had that comment too, that we might move our measures around. So what Brenda's got for us is
Hard to deal with in the commission for a lot of it. And sometimes like the diversity one, that's where you get most of your complaints dealing with non-police stuff usually.
yeah. So our role for the commission will be, it's our job to make sure there's a strategic plan in place. And so working with this. And so what I'm hoping we'll be able to do is take all this work that Brenda's done and fine tune it.
Sometimes dealing with this process with the RCMP for 10 or plus years, sometimes too much information takes away from Warren doing what he should be doing. Mm-hmm. And I know there's ways of trying to report it to people up, but sometimes it's overwhelming. Too much information isn't good either.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think through Brenda's and my conversations, we threw a lot of stuff in here. But I think what still needs to happen is that we meet as a committee, narrow the focus a little bit, or combine some of the
I'm new here and
bullets.
still learning. I just don't want to get it overwhelmed.
No, and I'm glad you brought it up, actually, because I was going to make the same comment, is we still need to move forward with finalizing the document and providing a bit of a focus, cleaning it up a bit, but there's also some other variables that come into play in developing the document. And that's the city strategic plan, which is still being developed. So at some point, it would be nice to have Cora or even invite Diane in, because she's heavily involved in that process on the city side, specific to policing, and Diane oversees corporate services, including other enforcement services for the city. So we're ensuring that we're in alignment on our strategic plans. So I think we need to whittle things down a little bit, come to some consensus. I made a couple of notes, and as we were developing it, we threw a lot of stuff. Brendan threw a lot at me, I threw a lot back, just trying to get it all organized. But I guess they
You're talking about making it smaller. That's where you need to go, instead of making those big jumps, and it becomes overwhelming, too much information.
Well, and the big thing is, I think that everything's in alignment with those provincial standards audit that we have to comply with at the end of the day, because sometimes we're required to report or have within our strategic plan items just to meet those provincial standards requirements, even though we may think they're not overly relevant to our day-to-day business, but we still have to meet that compliance. So I think it's a great start. I think it will be easy to review and go through. And one of my recommendations was maybe setting aside some time at 11 o'clock on February 17th after our regular meeting to meet specific to the strategic plan, and then we can get some other information. I don't know Brenda's availability. I haven't talked, but that also gives Brenda a chance to review this a little bit more. But it would allow for commission input and then really fine tuning the document. If you look at our previous strategic plans, this is probably watered down or more specific than the old ones were, and the targets and measurables are more clearly defined as well. So we have the ability to meet any of the asks within here or get the stats on it. It's just, yeah, that's relevant, not from a commission perspective. The other point I wanted, or point or question that I had was, Brenda, you make reference in your initial comments and questions, and actually Commissioner Larson brought this up a meeting or two ago, was in relation to having separate there's benefit to combining them, but based on what you have in this document, it recommends go to have two separate documents. But I think that's a discussion that the commission would need to have on which direction they need to go. So I think that's an earnest piece for discussion within the commission.
Yeah, for sure. On that particular comment, and I'll just go back to the original comment. The indicators or the measures that are in here would not all be implemented at one time. And just as Chief Bloomhagen is saying, the commission would set particular items of interest if you're moving to implementation. But you can add these in over time. So if you said over 10 years, year one, we're measuring these things, year two, we're measuring these things, year three, we're measuring these things, you can certainly do that. And it doesn't change the integrity or the meaningfulness of any of your data, and it won't trip over each other, which was another thing that we worked fairly hard on, is trying to keep the streams very clear and separate, so that if you do add in or take away, you're not actually negatively impacting one indicator over another. The point I made about the strategic plans is it's quite common for the governance body to have a strategic plan, and then the actual service area would have their own strategic plan. This would not change drastically, your particular outline, but I just did note that you present one strategic plan on behalf of the commission and the police service. And it would be easy to separate those things out, which just creates a bit of separation between the front line and the body governance. It's just that's a very common model. Just, you know, if you look at your circumstances, there's the City of Lacombe Council Strategic Plan, which has a certain level of authority, a depth, and your plan, the LPS Commission plan, comes in under that. And then if the policing service had a plan under that, all that would happen in that is that those indicators would probably shift down to the policing strategic plan, and that would become Chief Bloomhagen's strategic plan, which would be rolling up into then your strategic goals.
And I actually don't mind it in one document, but the commission does also get audited as well. So if it is a combined document, you have to make sure that all the commission provincial audit requirements are covered off in the shared strat plan, or if there was two separate documents, that those same considerations need to be made, that it's in alignment with through the governance,
right,
buddies, rental requirements, and then police services.
And maybe the word is would be complementary plans, where it's more just got a little bit, it's not as separate, but it's completely up to the commission. And just of note, it's not anything that's you know, concerning or anything like that.
No, it's true, because I mean, if the measure is well governed, we've got well governed from our level, and
Right.
well in the service.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's one of those options that we do have, is we can do a combination. I think it's just been procedurally easier. And
Sure.
so, but I do see the commission doing it, getting this one developed well, and then we can kind of set aside things that we know that we could pull out that would actually be commission measures rather than under the measures for the service.
And quite frankly, in the past, the previous strat plans, when they were separate between the commission and the service, weren't in alignment. So if I have to meet expectations from the commission strategic plan, they need to be in alignment with our service strategic plan, setting our priorities. And if they aren't in alignment, it's very difficult. But with the KPI process, that whole process ensures they're in alignment, where we didn't have a secondary process to ensure that we're talking the same language, or providing consistent direction to the service, or reporting expectations back to the commission. So that is more of a discussion piece. By no means would I try and influence you either way, but I think it's a discussion that needs to take place with the commission level.
Excellent. Any other questions for Brenda? Yes, Cora, please.
Thanks, Chair. I've got actually a few questions, but first off is just thank you for noting that the city is amiss, that we don't really have a specific strategic goal for the police commission. And weirdly, maybe this is an awkward question, but does the commission have a suggestion to the city as to what that goal should be? Does that make sense? Even though that is backwards, because ultimately the city is somewhat directing the commission, but because we would want to focus on teamwork to an extent, could there be some suggestion in that regard, because we are process and renewing our strategic plan as well. So Chief Hagan is,
I think that makes sense for us to maybe, because if we're kind of the forerunners and get that set up, we could assist the city with
yeah,
what yours looked like for us.
right.
And then city would like to give it back to us and make it a lot easier. We're kind of setting up their targets to blend with our targets.
Right, right. So that would be my question. I know that we did, and I apologize because it was just a workshop that we did our strategic plan, and I know that we had a comment about the police, but I cannot pull it out of my brain. Can I follow up with a couple of questions? Just, do we really want our complaints reduced? That was just under the governance measure. Well, govern numbers 8% of complaints are reduced or sustained. Like, I get it that I think Commissioner Dykes spoke to this in one of our past meetings, is that we don't necessarily want no complaints, actually, weirdly. Like, we do want to have our citizens understand that they can approach the service and comment or complain, however it is. So I guess I'm a little bit wondering about that target. I guess I appreciate when it says percent complaints are sustained rather than having the reduced part. Just throwing that.
And I think that will be part of our discussions for next week is, should that PCB actually be there, or should that be under the community measure?
Right.
And so is it about not having complaints, or is it about making sure complaints are dealt with appropriately?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so no, you're right. And again, at least we've got something to start with, and we can move it around.
I should have prefaced this with, in my experience in being on a lot of boards, this is probably one of the most readable and understandable and great documents. Thanks, Brenda. I found it easy to follow, especially for a newbie on the commission. But I just had one last question, just as a thought. Is officer diversion necessarily a bad thing? What I mean is, when police are taken away from the actual policing, if you will, that, or is that, or are they acting out sort of preventative services? Does that make sense? So is this, yeah.
I agree with that. Like, to me, if we start tracking that time, we can actually, because it's hard to say, okay, crime is reduced, well, then we don't need police officers. Whereas if we can actually track and show where the time is being spent, and so that it is part of us showing that we are involved in the community. And
right.
So crime is reduced because we spent so much time diverting here.
Right.
So yeah,
So,
I agree with you.
and that's just a question coming from a place of rather new in looking at this. As I read that measure, I didn't necessarily see it as something we wanted to speak to.
Yeah, and I think your point's very valid. And I could probably speak to them at length, and maybe we can for those two, when we sit down to review the plan in its entirety, because there's a number of areas in here. The whole police diversion discussion, I think, goes back to your original question. And when we're aligning with the city's expectations or responsibilities, council sets the budget, but they also set the service level expectations, which I don't think anybody has ever clearly defined as to what that is. 24/7 policing. It might include community diversion items or issues. What are the expectations of the police service? Then the commission takes that service level expectation in alignment with the budget and provides the governance, and the police service delivers through operations. So having those definitions from all levels only helps solidify that relationship overall, but it also eliminates some of the confusion and frustration on who's responsible for what as we move forward. So looking at it from a governance model to operate effectively at each level, we need some of those clarifying questions asked and answers provided at each level. So, but the whole area around officer diversion, there's a lot of work being done around that. There's been a lot of discussion, so it, my answer would be fairly, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
totally fair.
Any other thoughts and comments I think is worth sharing?
Brenda's got her hand raised.
Go, Brenda.
Is it appropriate that I just follow up with Councillor Hoekstra?
Yes.
Oh, okay. You raise an excellent point, and I probably didn't talk enough about this in my presentation. When you get to the analysis of your data, you're really just looking at what happened. And then you're asking the question, okay, so that happened. What does that say or mean about our particular service and the goals that we had? So your comment about complaints is great, because you don't want 0 complaints, because that is clearly an indicator of your integration with your community if people are interacting with you. But at the same time, you don't want escalating complaints around a similar issue year after year that is not being resolved, that's standing in the way of you integrating into your community. And so it's really that analysis piece when we get the data. It's not is this great or bad? It's where are we? What does this say about us? And how does this relate back to the strategic goals of the commission and the city strategic plan? And just on the city strategic plan, keeping in mind that strategic plans, are the top of the organization. And so the higher in the organization, the broader the statement. And so language around, when I did a bit of research, cities say things like they want a local, responsive, protecting, policing body to manage the issues in the city. And this goes to your point about some of them might not be criminal issues. They may be mental health issues. They may be domestic violence issues, which bridges both that social and legal world. And so again, you want to illustrate that picture and then be able to go back and say, here's what's happening in our community. And we were responsive. We can talk to you about how responsive we were. We can talk about how integrated into the community we are. We can talk about all the things that we're on the edge of, that we're concerned about, that we know of because we're integrated into the community. And so you're actually using all these little bits of data to paint that really big picture that goes back to those very decisive words that are within each of your strategic plans. And that's where that idea about, if you get the service activity plan below, I won't call it a strategic plan, but you've got the City of Lacombe, you've got Lacombe Police Commission, and then you've got the activities on the front line. Those activities should be aligning to something said in those other 2 strategic plans, and it should be painting a picture of how things are moving towards the same, away to those specific goals. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts and comments? I think the thoughts and comments are important because it gets us thinking for when we go to fine tune it. Well, again, thank you very much, Brenda. It's pretty exciting stuff. I know it's intense and it's a lot of detail, but you can sure see how much effective and improvement it's going to have on our big picture when we are able to complete this process. You are welcome, Brenda, to sign off. I think everyone's got questions, or it's public meetings. You're also very welcome to continue to attend. I know it's probably pretty tempting.
Well, I really, really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you and present it, and enjoyed your questions, and we'll probably talk soon.
I'm sure we'll be back.
You want her?
I don't know. I think that for our February 17th meeting, I think it would be nice for us to just kind of work through it. And then what I can see us doing is proposing some fine tuning and then bringing it back to Lauren to work with Brenda Bond about just commenting back on it so that we're not going off track. Does that sound reasonable for Brenda?
I think so, sure. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Brenda.
Brenda.
Oh, there's Jen.
Oh, she's back.
Sorry, you guys, I live in the country and Wi-Fi, and I've even hardwired. Sometimes it just goes kind of wonky, so I apologize.
Attention, were you off for long, Jen?
All I heard was February meeting, we will leave it more to discuss
Yeah.
this plan, and then I was gone.
Okay, so our action on our February agenda will be that at 11 o'clock or shortly after the first agenda is that we will meet to start reviewing specifically the details of our strategic plan.
What's the practice in terms of?
Do we need just a quick break?
But
Let's call a quick break and then we'll move on to item 8, which is report in our agenda.
Okay.
So 5 minutes, 10 to 5. We'll move to reports. So the chief's report is in your agenda package.
I'm just gonna breeze through it fairly quickly because some of the stuff I'll speak to more in depth once we go in camera. On budget though, for 2021, finance hasn't reconciled the books completely, but overall we are anticipating a surplus arising out of 2021. We won't know probably till the end of March. The finance reconciles everything as to what that is, but right now it does look like you're going in that direction. And for 2022, it's really too early to do a budget actual report, so that will be provided in at next month's meeting. Professional standards, and somewhat tying into our previous discussion. In here we list, we talk about public complaints. We're usually talking about complaints or investigations under the police service regulations that are legislated, the procedures to follow, and that ties into public complaints. Sometimes we report on, or not sometimes, but we always tell you about, we also get citizens' concerns that somebody wants to file a complaint. It doesn't fall within scope under the police service regulation, but they don't like a member's attitude or demeanor when they're getting a traffic ticket and they want to complain about that. It's really out of scope. We'll address the concern and valid. So we usually, so in the last month, we had a couple of citizen concerns that did not fall within scope. And then we had our complaint back in September. We filed another 45-day update to the complainant on the status of that matter. And if time allows, I will speak to that further and bring forward a request to the commission in relation to that matter. Whereas other highlights, just under leadership activities, it looks a little short, but we did spend a lot of time. The city administration staff, the association, have been in conversations over a portion of the collective agreement on special forces pension contributions for people in acting capacity, temporary acting sergeants, usually for the supplies. We have met and resolved this issue, and it will be going back to, there's a city policy that's required, so that policy will go before council to allow for this. It's more of a legislative procedure. So we have discussed that. We've also met with the new city HR manager and other staff recently. Some of our WCB claims and other items that we'll report on more in camera as well. Other than that, if there's any questions for my report. Okay.
What's CPKN?
Canadian Police Knowledge Network.
Any questions for the chief? We'll move on to the SRO report. So our SRO report's looking pretty slim. It wasn't as busy a month necessarily. Anything of note that you wanted to bring to our attention, Chief?
No, just with the Christmas holidays, extra school closures around COVID was a little slower. We did have the SRO follow up on a few, or assist with some regular patrol duties. But we also had some time off.
And one of the things we see in our SO report kind of goes back to that whole idea of the non-diversion of an officer, but even the time spent doing problem solving with students and parents and mental health issues is, you know, again, something that maybe we need to start to brag about. Let's include it as something that we're doing that's more proactive than reactive. Budget report then, the budget is in the package. The chief commented that, you know, we are anticipating the surplus. A lot of it, this was odd years. It's an odd year. There's a lot of training that we can't pay for because we can't go on. You know, a concern to us is always, are we generating the income we thought we would? And if not, why, what not? And a lot of the income side of the budget is whether we've received our, any of the income we have generated, which is.
And further comments on that, we're into the 11th hour, awaiting provincial grants, and they really came in last week of the year, and are noted on the report. So we're very happy to see those. But when you actually look at the variance at the end of the report, it shows a fairly significant surplus to be anticipated, but don't focus too closely on that number because a number of transfers still have to be made as administrative recovery services, debenture, interest payments, those types of things. So there are a number of lines that still have to follow their expenses. But having said that, they'll be in a surplus position once all those bookkeeping adjustments are made.
And then for us, it's kind of, you know, we talked about this last meeting too. It's hard because we really never really know. I feel like we never really know for sure where we're at. We're not budgeting for a surplus, but we're also making sure that we're not in a deficit. So it's one of those things that I don't know if we know until March for sure how we've actually done it in a year. So it's hard to be timely and responsive. All we can do is use the information. So as we're creating our budgets, trying to be realistic. Public complaints director. I didn't actually see a report in here. Was there a report, Jen, from the PCD? I don't think there was.
No, I did send out the request, but did not receive a response.
Good. Are you aware of any complaints during the month, Chief?
Citizen concerns. So just when you stepped over there, I was just speaking about those as part of my report. That we had 2 citizens' concerns that they were not accepted as complaints under the service regulations.
I just put my report in, just tracking what we've been up to over the last little bit. We did conduct the orientation last week, which was lots of information and lots of conversation, which I hopefully was helpful for everybody. Councillor Hoekstra, we have your report.
It's in front of you. I don't have anything to add at this point.
Okay.
Again, a bit of a slower month, of course, because of the end of December is happening.
Yeah, everything slows to a crawl. We have no vice chair report this time. So any further questions on reports, anything arising? Elaine? Excellent, thank you, Elaine. Can we have a seconder?
One of the C's will take it.
Okay, Jen can choose. All in favor?
Wherever you like best.
There we
Jen.
go.
Oh.
I think it's going to Cora.
That's right. Oh,
Yeah. This is good.
To be honest, I only heard Cam's name, so.
There we go. Woohoo.
Just kidding. Thanks, Jen.
You're covering, we know.
The check's in the mail.
One of the things in the agenda that we've got is just the presentation of the current LPS organizational structure. It's something that the chief noted that he's required to report to us on and wasn't sure that we had it up to date in our binders, but just as information. Is taking a review of this. If anybody has any questions for the chief or any comments or anything that they're interested in seeing.
The commission does authorize service strength and resources. So I think this org chart is alignment with those authorizations. So the previous one that was in there was under the old human resource plan.
So once we've had it reviewed, I think what we should have then is just a motion to accept the chart as an approval of our current authorized strength for service.
So one question. I'm seeing 22 members and not 23 sworn members on here. Am I reading wrong? So you got 16.
So where you're missing one would be, I'm sorry, as I can read very well, the alert position. So we have 23. So I guess.
So you got 16 on the teams.
Right.
Then we got 5 special, which is 21. 22 would be the in-air staff. Then 23 would be.
So the alert position is missing, and that should be a top branch of the organizational support NCO. So, Jen, can you fire that back to me for correction, and we can bring it back?
Very observant, Commissioner Penstone.
So,
That guy.
the alert position is a surplus to authorize. So that position is not coming out of our budget. So we're paying for 22 members. The 23rd position is paid for by alert. Gotcha.
And you, sorry, you as a, you're not considered one of the sworn members.
Yes,
You are.
Okay.
Then that makes 23.
That's how it is counted.
okay. Then,
Yeah.
then the alert guy is in there somewhere.
Would he be, Sonya's trying to get into? What's CL?
Community liaison officer, which is
Traffic.
I know. Terminology is out, but
Okay,
get it to reject.
let's pull this. Sounds good.
Fair enough.
And Jen, you have the original of this one? Okay,
I believe so. I actually found it when I was doing the binders. This is why this has come up, so I apologize. And it was in draft form and I couldn't find any notes. So I did reach out to the chief in regards to this. So this is probably why it's outdated with terminology. So I will send the original off.
great. Now I have to go back to the human resource plan to be quite frank. And, figure out whether it's 23 local and plus alert or 22 plus the.
All right. So new business wise, on our agenda package, we've got proposed dates. So generally for the commission, we do meet the third Thursday of every month. We tend to skip July. I think we're required to meet at least 6 times a year or 8 times a year. So we do meet monthly. So by skipping July, we've got 11. Just on a quick review, does anyone have any immediate concerns on any of these dates? Do they fall within? Yes, Celia, please.
I know I have a problem for August.
Okay,
Definitely.
okay.
And I'm not, I don't get August, here at the August meeting.
So any other dates in here that look conflicting? So August tends to be one of those months that is our budget month. Well, that's all right, but what we can do is keep track of this because we could also choose to have more of a July and skip August, or have something a little bit more in the middle as well. Coming up. Yeah,
July, would it work better for the commission to do a July meeting in August?
that's what I'm
And then
wondering.
do a subcommittee for budget in August?
Yeah.
Where we can have a picker date kind of thing?
Yeah, pick a date that's a little bit better.
Uh,
So, yes, Chief?
On that point, done it that way in the past. My preference is I do a lot of budget preparation in July when the commission isn't meeting.
Gotcha.
So my ability to bring, so commission really needs to see that draft budget at the end of August, so we can have it ready to go to council either in September or very early in October. So the draft I prepared in July and bring it forward in August. It really works a lot better because even then, when we're working it into the city's budget, the city doesn't finalize a lot of their timelines or decisions until even into September. And our presentation is, so
Yeah.
moving it forward is just probably, well, and it's already problematic when we do it in August because we're making projections and then our targets change. We don't have a clear direction from the city on our budget targets and stuff like that. So we can present a budget, but as you've seen, it changes numerous times in sometimes days before we present to council.
How does August 25th look for conflict?
So anything.
Exactly.
It's hard to.
Jennifer, you had a comment?
Sorry, you guys, I just can't hear. It's not
Oh.
very clear.
Well, right now we're just trying to discuss dates. So my thought would be during August, during the bulk of August, we will be having committee meetings for budget. So that if we set the 25th, even if you're not here for the official meeting, if you've been part of the budget, you'll know what's being presented. But as long as we can, having two people missing isn't ideal. Because I want both of you to be part of that. Let's try for August 25th, and then that is a period of time where there's a lot of communication or the other. But this one will then at least be our formal public meeting. So we know for both Commissioner Dyksleg and Commissioner Willett Larson that lead up to the education process is going to be challenging, and hopefully will be quick meetings as well.
Put that on the June agenda and then come up with a date at our last meeting in June or August.
Just to wait.
Yeah, and that way everybody's schedules are maybe a little bit clearer at the end if we're to have to make an adjustment that's 2 months in advance to.
Okay, so
for
if
return.
if we're adopting this calendar for 2022, we could simply just put to be determined for August.
And does it have to be Thursday?
It doesn't, it just traditionally hasn't. So that's the other option we have, is to find a date that's.
Yeah.
That's there. Okay, I think that's a good suggestion. If everyone's satisfied with that.
Works for me.
And Jen heard that?
So August we'll put to be determined. All these smart minds keeping us going. Next on new business is to discuss the public complaint director position. So we have received a letter of notice of resignation from Brad Paris. He is just indicating enjoyed it, but he's just finding he just doesn't have the time for it and the capacity for it. So he hasn't resigned in the sense that we're not missing our position, but we do need to replace the PCD. And so my thoughts on PCD, just to exchange what my recollection of the situation is, and I count on the chief to correct me, is the PCD position, super important that we have someone who is there to take on that role and to make sure the process is being followed. The PCD can be a commission member. There's no reason for it not to be a commission member. And even when we brought Brad along, the chief has been anticipating changes to the PCD department for a long time. So there was a lot of support and training that he didn't get. So as a commission, if we're taking a look at our KPIs, is making sure all our positions are fully filled. We do need to do some work to replace him. And I think that our options are to either seek a PCD outside of the commission or appoint one from within the commission. Any thoughts? Lauren, you probably, Chief, you have thoughts on that?
In my experience, having PCD from the commission is, I think, a little bit more streamlined. Session members are at every meeting. There just seems to be a closer connection, and when we're dealing with timelines on items, just the level of communication just seems to be commission members more focused on commission business. So there's a double connection there. And even as far as the training for the commission members, it does tie into PCD as well. So some of that training comes naturally through your understanding of through your role as a commission. I haven't observed any real conflicts of interest in that regard, but opening it up to the public, our past experiences is it took several months to fill that position, and then you're dealing with somebody that there is a bit of a disconnect, and accessing the training, especially in our current environment, with changes in government and the Police Act, that training is hard to access right now.
So as a commission, then we need to maybe canvass some interest. I think the chief has some thoughts and ideas on it, since we have a member with some vigorous RCMP experience. But also just to canvass interest in the position. I don't know that the position is necessarily too taxing, but you do have to take phone calls. You do have to be available. Thoughts, comments, ideas, volunteers?
And it comes with very shiny. I don't know, I haven't seen it in a while. We do supply a phone for public complaints directors to use. They don't have to give a personal phone. Director email address, could be some there, but yeah, we also the ability, I do communicate either through email or by phone or in person with the PCD, the various processes. So have something with the availability. Not worry about other conflicts, whether with your current situations or jobs, having the time and flexibility to can be great.
And I wanted to retract, I think with both John and Ken joining our group and knowing your guys' retired positions, I didn't want to exclude John from volunteering from that too, because I also think both of you, having met you and talked to you, would do an excellent job.
I might be interested in.
Okay. So maybe the chief and John and Ken can have a chat. Elaine, I am assuming that with all of your other duties, that that wouldn't be something, and I apologize for that. Am I correct on that?
But I can be.
Okay, so then don't let me assume. My apologies. And so again, I'm just kind of misassuming here. I'm assuming that Sonia wasn't interested in it either.
Well, the only reason I would be interested in is it might extend my time on the commission because it would be a new role. So that would be the only reason that allows me to stay on commission, or is it still my tenure up being 6 years on commission? Because it's a different title, right? So that would be the only reason, because I don't want to leave. I love you guys too much.
If I can comment on that.
Yeah,
Your tenure on the commission expires, but because you don't have to be a member of the commission,
Exactly.
PCD role, you can stay on as a PCD as long as you want. There aren't any time frames associated to that position that I'm aware of. So having the previous commission experience and knowledge would be beneficial moving forward, but you would still be able to maintain not the commission position, but the PCD commission after that
Yeah.
time frame. Because that position is not one that goes through the mayor. That one is commission designation.
So I only throw that out there. It was just kind of a backwards way to maybe stay a part of this group. Not saying I'm for sure interested or not, just throwing that, like, it just was a thought process. I haven't really fleshed it all out, and I need to keep my hand down and just sit on them for a change. But I don't want to lose my, and I think I have 1 year left on the commission. I don't even know what my time is. I have no idea anymore.
there's always the +1 option. What was that?
December 31st, 2022 on here
Okay,
is the end.
and then there's the +1 option
Oh,
that we can ask the mayor to extend 1 further year as well. Okay, so it sounds like we have a lot of people who would do an excellent job and have some interest in this. So let's just leave that out. And if you have some interest, I think the best thing would be to approach the chief.
Actually,
Yeah, what?
accept letters of interest from
Sure.
commission members, because I shouldn't be
Okay, yeah,
making the selection on that. It should be coming through the commission. So if you were to put a letter of, if you're opening up to the public, then an advertisement would need to go, and all responses would be received by the chair.
Yeah.
Through the administrative assistant, or I think the process should be the same for internally if those letters of or expressions of interest are coming from commission members, that they should come to.
however, are you open to people with interest talking to you
Yes,
about the job?
yes,
Okay,
Any questions on what that role entails? I'm open for, any inquiries or attaching questions on that. But then on the process for identifying your selection.
yes.
So,
Oh, and that still would come back to the
Yes,
commission in any event, the actual selection. Let me ask the commission. Do we need to advertise publicly?
I think you should do the those first if you have no interest in what comes. That'd be my opinion.
Okay, good consensus. Okay, I like that consensus. So for right now, Sonia?
Can I didn't hear, is this resignation effective immediately? I see you have his phone, or is it the end of this term?
He's given us notice that he would like to resign. He has not
Oh, it's
officially.
your phone. Okay.
So my thought would be that we will move this to the next, we won't accept the resignation yet. That we'll move this to the next agenda item with our commission members giving some thought to, and before that meeting, presenting, giving an indication of interest to me so that we can make an appointment.
Okay, perfect. And it was the chief's phone?
Yeah, it was just an example of the gift one might receive.
Some things get lost in translation when you're not in the room, so perfect. Thank you.
An extra phone, just because everybody wants 2 phones.
I've already got 2 phones on. I didn't need a third.
Okay, any other thoughts on that? Move along. The annual conference of the Alberta Association of Police Governance, which is AAPG, has been established for Friday, April 29th and Saturday, April 30th. This meeting, we discussed a little bit at the orientation meeting, but this group is definitely the commission's guiding body. It's where we go for resources, and this annual meeting is a very good chance to interact and learn about our roles. The actual meeting is going to be held in St. Albert's. So we don't need to make any decisions at this time, but traditionally we do send members. We don't always send every member, but I would certainly like to encourage anyone who's interested to go. We have budgets that we haven't used because we haven't gone for the last few years. So throw it out there. I'll bring it up again next meeting to ask who's interested. Let me look and see if I've got a deadline.
Early. Book early.
It says book early, but I think they'll take us no matter what. So I think we will be well served if we make some decisions and commitments by next February. But this February.
Yeah, that's just a block of reserved rooms.
Yeah.
We indicate book early, right? Yeah. There's lots of places they know.
Yeah, exactly.
And your annual association dues for the APG have been submitted for payment, so that bill came in.
Thanks, Chief. Questions, comments?
So there's no limit, basically, ish.
Ish. If all 6 of us want to go, we need to look at the budget, because I don't think we have enough money for that, but that doesn't mean we can't find the money. And I can definitely see some value in it. I have had the opportunity to go a few times so that I could always pull back from a budget point of view. And
If I were to attend,
okay,
I'm certainly not going to.
okay, and that will also be then what we can consider. Chief?
And just within the budget, double check, it's only been modified slightly, but at one time it's $3,500 per year. And I was really set to allow people, this was the primary area of spending under the training for the commission. So that was considered part of the training. So we can reconfirm the numbers, but at minimum it would be $2,500, which is typically more than enough to get everybody to this conference.
So yeah, don't be dissuaded from doing it. We'd rather you go and find the money. Can't. All right. Yeah, the 2-page agenda. It's a biggie.
But yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah, they'll add it now, and we have the extra agenda. Sorry, on information, there was simply just a new person appointed as CEO of the Alert Board. I lost it. Okay. By the way, we get all sorts of, well, not all sorts, but when we get emails, we like to share. So
And that, actually, that one I reported on, I was involved in the selection, on the interview and selection committee for that individual. So very supportive of that election.
excellent. We are now at item number 12, to move in camera. Cam,
I will make a motion to move into camera.
Cora seconds, all in favor? We have quite a list.